Hi, and welcome to our Pragmatic Guide to Compliance and Platforms. In my experience, nothing clears a room as efficient as a conversation about compliance. If you have developers, they will be anywhere but in that conversation. They would run, they would hide, they would avoid, and they would rather work around compliance than address it. We believe that software organizations would benefit from a more pragmatic approach to handling compliance. In this session, we will share our thoughts on how to approach compliance from an internal developer platform perspective, so that even though it might feel cumbersome and confusing at times, your systems and teams are better set up for success. Compliance is often tucked in at the end, leading to a misfit between systems and expectations, often delaying deliveries, temporarily or indefinitely. When we design or in platforms with compliance in mind, we open up for a world of possibilities. Hopefully less painful than the ones we had before. But we rarely get a chance to build a platform in a vacuum. The organization is already there, it's already alive, you already have something in place. You probably already have an implicit platform, even if you don't have an explicit platform yet. So you can't just go throwing out all the old stuff because they are old. You need to take those into consideration and work with what's already there and elevate it to the next level. We know how to build compelling internal developer platforms that leads the everyday life of developers. Let's apply that knowledge and find a way of thinking and of supporting compliance as we do with our internal developer platforms, only replacing the idea of a golden path for the majority with a full coverage instead. My name is Jessica. I'm a cloud architect at Trice. I'm also CNCF ambassador and a community organizer in Gothenburg, Sweden. I work with internal developer platforms and enablement for the last 8 years, both as a leader and hands-on.
I'm Jonathan. I'm a cloud engineer at Trice. Spent the last decade sort of doing engineering, a little bit of technical leadership. And I realized as I was prepping for this talk, I kind of never got very far around, like away from the compliance-heavy industries. It's been e-invoicing, digital signatures, sort of trusted services under eIDAS, and the automotive industry, the big, scary enterprise. I've spent a lot of time reading shall and should in all caps. We work for a tiny upstart consultancy that sort of targets the intersection between tech and strategy, and we've run into some challenges related to compliance-heavy organizations, particularly those that don't have software as their primary delivery or primary product, or that have like a rich existing compliance organization and workflows that are really slowing them down in their day-to-day delivery. So that's like where we're coming at here. It's funny to define internal developer platform at the platform track, but it'll mess up my timing if I don't do it, so like bear with me. The core idea, it's gluing together sort of the sprawl of systems that we all work with on a day-to-day basis by building a shared set of tools and components that like assist and enable us to deliver faster. Typical goals: speeding up provisioning, making CI/CD simpler, encouraging and enforcing best practices, often monitoring, logging, security, all that. Providing abstractions over infrastructure complexity, the ever-growing infrastructure complexity, and ultimately reducing cognitive load. More time delivering value, less time doing various bits of toil. So a lot of industry adoption, a lot of interests, hence this whole thing. The DORA State of DevOps report put the number at something like 89% of respondents last year that had interacted with an IDP. I don't know how that maps to organizational adoption percentages, but it's a lot. It is a little bit of a vague term, though, so definitions can stretch anywhere from like the fully automated, heavily opinionated application platform stuff, bells, whistles, GUIs, etc., and the sort of simpler sets of standards, few tools that hide away the hairiest bits of config. Red thread: we want to make developers work easier, we want to make it safer, we want to make it faster. So why do we then want to, like as people involved in building platforms, setting technical strategy, why do we need to care so much about compliance? First, risk to the business is very, very real. Fines, damages, brand damages, missed opportunities. This is millions of dollars or pounds or euros, what have you. We cannot ignore this. And secondly, this is a spot where development workflows really get bogged down in the busy work. So critical path tasks turn into whole project standstills as we wait for some provisioning to happen. Slightly non-standard integrations all of a sudden just need to be reviewed and approved before you can continue. So that just means that we have a huge opportunity to really deliver a lot of value to the organization by applying these lessons from the internal developer platform world, from platform thinking more generally, to the challenge of the compliance-heavy org. So, organizations that have been around a while, they have existing solutions to handle their compliance requirements. And if I'm being charitable, these are a little clunky. You might see like an application portfolio management tool, an enterprise architecture management tool. Maybe there's a configuration management database, all three together in some unholy configuration. Each has their own definition and picture of like what is a system, what's a server, what's an environment, what counts as an application. There's a series of sort of arcane risk register spreadsheets hidden away in the SharePoint somewhere. There's a myriad ServiceNow requests, workflows, forms. Everything comes together to really provide that backing, right? And these things ultimately, they flow from many things, but like a big sort of why they look the way they do is your organization's like compliance and legal background. And this is a huge source of cognitive load for the teams. And as our ways of working keep evolving, our servers have gone from like pets to cattle to insects. Data quality is getting harder and harder to maintain because the reality as recorded in whatever systems you have and the sort of reality on the ground starts drifting apart. And despite this, despite all these frustrations, the efforts to replace this tend to fail, often spectacularly. And I sort of put it down to the cruel reality of the 80-20 rule. You will realize at some point how much work is really required to get that last 20% and really replace what was already there. And it's tough. And lastly, just if we sort of look at this from the classic infinity sign SDLC perspective, from a developer point of view, you'll be building and shipping software, you're running around a little loop, and all of a sudden you're just circling the service account provisioning black hole, right? You'll find yourself in the maze of correctly registering the change record, or you've made it to production, and now you need to debug something, and you have fallen into the log access snake pit. There's a lot of shifting left happening in the industry. Your typical development team is all of a sudden responsible for like a wide variety of tasks across the stack, across the business. And the additional complexity of compliance is really what we're hitting up against here. But this isn't a talk about what's wrong with the world, although I could go on. It's a talk about what you should do about it. So there's been some great discussions already. I particularly liked the conceiving of like compliance and regulatory capabilities as an asset that Matthew was talking about on the upstairs track yesterday. And what follows is sort of our take on this. It's informed by the sorts of organizations that we have found ourselves working in, and I think maybe you could refer to this whole thing as a little bit enterprise damaged, but we'd like to suggest that your internal development platform can and should support compliant ways of working, but that it's critical to really get the approach right. So integrating with the existing ways of working rather than trying to replace the existing workflows wholesale. This reduces implementation risk a lot. It gives you time to really understand the processes that the company is following. This includes understanding like the processes as executed as opposed to the processes as written. And how these processes connect to each other. Because remember, you won't have succeeded in doing anything if all you've done is add one more tool to the list of things that are involved in the compliance workflow of your organization. Second, nowhere is the classic term like socio-technical system as relevant as in the platform. We build tooling that's so closely tied to workflows and interactions between teams. And your stakeholders aren't just on the technical side, it includes the non-technical part of the organization. All this business risk that we're dealing with, it carries a lot of weight in the boardroom. So building trust explicitly from the beginning and bringing the right people on board really helps that effort along. Finally, as somebody who's been caught in the middle of a few failed transitions to the promised land, don't get distracted by silver bullets that ignore the majority of what your organization is actually building and delivering to chase like what is current best practice, what's the next thing that's coming up. Yeah, on that note.
I will share some examples of what this can look like. And it's been said before during this conference that everyone has their own setup, and that is always true. So see it more as a way of putting these ideas into practice and then figure out for yourself later on what it would look like for you. But it's always easier when you try to connect it to something. So let's start out with a very common pattern for internal developer platforms, and it's the design system. The design system is consisting of 3 different parts. So you have the design UX part, where a UX designer probably sets the look and feel across a product. They set the theme and the colors, the font, the shapes, and basically how you want it to look and feel. And then you have the component library, which is the implementation of that. And in addition to that, you also have style guides, like a storybook or something similar, that tells the developer how to utilize the different things available, like what could a button look like when it's pressed, in what situation should you have text on it, when should you not have text on it, and all these different things. And all those things combined together becomes a design system that then your developers can use across like a larger product or across multiple teams, or whatever is your definition of something that you want to create a coherent look and feel across. So from what I hear and from the developers I worked with, a design system is something that is often very much appreciated. They like using it, and no one is running or hiding or fearing this kind of thing. So it's out there, it's used already. Let's enter the compliance. So if you are in a European Union country, you have probably not missed out on the recent surge in different acts that we have to follow when it comes to regulations. So the European Accessibility Act is a directive that aims to improve the functional of the internal market for accessible products and services. And the idea is to both make more of them available in the market, but also at more competitive prices. And they want to introduce fewer barriers for when accessing transport, education, and open labor market. And this act applies to a wide range of products and services, but among the ones that I think is most relevant when we talk about software is computers and operating systems. That already covers a lot. Smartphones, banking services, e-books, and e-commerce. So I think probably, without knowing what any one of you do, really, I think most of you feel some kind of relevance when it comes to this. And if you are implementing and like taking this into consideration, it might look something like the ability of changing the text size and the UI component size in your application or your website. It requires the support for screen readers. So if someone has a problem with visibility, they can attach a screen reader and get it to read and navigate through menus and submenus. And that without the support of a point and click, because you might not be able to see what you're point and clicking. So with the addition of like a keyboard instead or something similar. And before someone told me about like the changes they made to a menu system just to make it easy to traverse with a keyboard instead, I had absolutely no idea how complex just that small part of thing could be. So, and also a high visual contrast, which we kind of fixed with our look and feel here, I think. All these things, when we combine the power of a design system with implementation of accessibility, we allow our product teams to utilize what is already provided accessibility support across their products as well, and make their products meet the accessibility requirements without a lot of extra effort. Because if they are already utilizing the design system and they already built components, they probably already are fulfilling the accessibility requirements if the design system supported. So this is a perfect example of the power of internal developer platforms and how it can accelerate and ease the transition into being compliant with regulations. I would even say like this is hardly even something you have to be very pragmatic to realize and think it's a good way of going forward. So with that in mind, let's take a look at another example. And we are introducing the other DORA, which if you're working in the financial sector, you probably have spent a lot of time thinking about in the last, if you're lucky, more than 1 year, but if you're unlucky, probably the last year, because it was introduced in January this year. It stands for Digital Operational Resilience Act. The idea is basically if you're working in a financial sector, then you need to be able to prove that you can handle the risk of like restoring your systems, having good backups, and doing a lot of things. It's a very comprehensive act that has a lot of things that it covers, and I'm going to just narrow down on very small things. So we're going to focus on ICT risk management. And ICT stands for Information and Communication Technology. And I had to write that down in my speaker notes because I always forget what it stands for. And Article 9.4e, you can look it up if you want to. It says that in order to ensure that all changes to ICT systems are recorded, tested, assessed, approved, implemented, and verified in a controlled manner. And we're going to focus on the recorded part. But what do we mean with ICT? What does this apply to? So it includes changes to software, hardware, firmware components, systems, or security parameters. So basically try to, like, any changes you do to anything needs to be captured in a change record, more or less. Or at least that's one way of reading the regulations. If you read it, as I told you right now, that is everything needs to be captured, all the changes, all these things, you probably have something in place already for doing that type of change records. And you have to do it across a multiple range of things. So if you're in that setting, maybe you say that every change should be traceable, and Jira, because everyone loves Jira, is our source of truth. That's where we trace all the things. Regardless if you're making software, hardware, firmware components, system, or security parameter changes. So for software, it could look something like this. The developer, they push the code to Git, they have some kind of CI/CD pipeline, and they're deploying to the cloud. And whenever they want to make a change to production, they also create a change record into Jira, and they update it with if the deployment went well or not. Or if you are in one of the old enterprise organizations, it probably looks something more like this, with you have the meetings, you have the emails, you have the group of people, and you have to do it in the right order, and you have to update it and get it back. And I don't have time to explain all that complexity. So let's just go with a simplified version for now. In a very simplified version, you push your code, you have the pipelines. When you're ready, you create a record, you deploy to prod, you update the record, you close it, you're happy. It's a lot of a manual process, and I know that I would not live through doing that manual creating things a lot of times before I get very tired of it, and would probably try to consider to find another way of doing it. If possible, once again, avoid, work around, but if I can't, then find some other way. As the important aspect here is capturing what system was changed, when was it changed, and by whom. All of this information is available in our Git history. So we can just skip the middleman. I don't know why we have a user doing this thing. We can just cut them out and instead have our CI/CD pipeline update when we press we want to deploy to production and send all that information over there. To be even more concrete, as a platform team, we can provide a reusable workflow, a reusable deployment pipeline that checks whenever you are deploying to production. Also, before you do that, create a Jira ticket with all the information that we have from Git, do the deployment, check the result of the deployment, and then update and close the Jira ticket with the result. While one could argue that since we create the ticket automatically, all the information is already in Git, why even involve Jira at all? Because, I mean, we could just cut out Jira from the story, right? But this is where we want to argue that you have to be pragmatic. Because as I mentioned before, it's not just software. It's all the other things as well. And not everyone in your organization is going to capture all the changes in Git. So if you don't make sure that you capture the software changes in Git, then suddenly either you have two streams, or you have to find a way to get everyone else to get their changes into Git as well. And while it might not hurt me personally if we cut out Jira, and we have two different streams, someone else is probably going to suffer for that. And in the end, that we have an audit review of the organization, it's not very sustainable to have several different sources that we have to go look at. I see a lot of nodding, so I can see a lot of people resonating with this thing. So we want to lean into the existing solution and move faster forward while keeping the interface for audits. With this built-in support to create year tickets automatically, we're leaning into the tooling that's already in place, we're automating the manual tasks, we're reducing the cognitive load from the developers. I mean, remembering creating that year ticket, closing it, did you close the ticket after deployment? You know all the things. And maintaining the auditability for compliance. So all in all, we take something very boring, automate it, and we make it better. If someone asked me where I was on April 2nd, I could probably ask after something, really not, because I live in Gothenburg, and I know I was here in London on April 2nd, and it was really nice because I attended QCon and everything. But if they ask me, like, what commit I made last week and why, I have absolutely no idea, because honestly, it was last week. So it's very hard to get the details of what we're doing and why. So in some cases, when we handle sensitive data or sensitive systems, we need to be able to answer the question of who viewed what data, when and why, or who changed what system and why, because you can't really go and view like patient records or like sensitive bank records for users and customers without really having a clear reason why, because that's a breach, data breach basically. And we want to trust our developers, but we need to be able to verify, if nothing else, then at least in order to to be able to show a clear trail during an audit review. And most systems have built-in support for audit events and audit logs, which is great. I mean, if you're running in the cloud, if you're in AWS or GCP or all the other things, you will have clear audit events of who logged into the system, who accessed what resource and whatnot. But you won't be able to capture the why. Why were they looking at this data? Why were they accessing user data for this account? And we can at least apply a least privilege pattern on access, and we can know that not everyone had access at all the time, but we still don't know the why. So imagine that we have two different roles. The default role that allows you to view the system, read the logs, metrics, and other non-sensitive things, and hopefully perform most everyday actions, while the other role is behind a break glass protection, which you can request for a limited period of time when you need to make changes to the system or read sensitive data. Think like accessing databases, user data, or secrets. So while our audit events allow us to see who and what, we need to apply some glue in order to get the traceability of the why. If we design our platform to support the break glass functionality, to easily gain in that elevated access, and we can do this part ourselves, we can also make sure that the elevated access is for limited scope and time frame. So let's think, once again, you have multiple AWS accounts, and you can select the certain ones. You don't get elevated access across everything. You get it for the thing that you really need to access. And we can also limit it to it's like a short period of time, so it's not when you come back from lunch and do something else, suddenly you still elevated access. And in addition, we can connect this to our Jira or other change request system. And we can preload a list of relevant tickets for that developer that they can choose from to connect to. Because if you have a bug report, you have a feature request, or any other thing, then you might already have a ticket. You probably already have a ticket for it if you work like that. And we can connect that why to the who and when, without our developers having to manually fill in the reason. Because once again, I know I'm a bad person, but change that, fix that other thing, deploy to prod, whatever. I know I've written those reasons. It's not great, but we will do it. Let's admit it. So make it easy for them to do it right and provide a good reason. This would then create an additional audit event that leaves a clear trail of the whys that in combination with the what and whom from the default audit events will create a more clear picture. Like user ID gained elevated access to account ID for issue ID. And then you had the following trail of user ID on account ID did the thing. And those together paint a clear picture. So if someone were to show me this later on, I would probably actually know what it meant. I probably had to open the issue ID, but still. So again, as a platform team, we can work with what's already there, enrich it with more information, and introduce sane defaults to our teams to interact with. while minimizing the extra energy, hops and loops needed for them to do the task they need to do. With thus taking on a bit of extra effort in designing and building on platforms, we allow our organization to have a clear audit trail of actions around the system. And in case something needs following up, there's a clear trace of why something was done. And this is another pragmatic example of how you can improve things.
All right. I just thought 5 minutes left. There's not 5 minutes left. So we've bombarded you with some musings about the compliance-heavy organization and giving you some concrete examples from our latest escapade, sort of knocking down the walls in the maze and trying to board up the snake pits. It's your turn to figure out how to continue from here and bridge that gap between platform and compliance. And the sort of message is that you might have to accept compromises and a little bit of odd solutions, but the pragmatic approach helps you get further and faster away from this like snake-filled future that we're trying to avoid. Just don't try to open a service account. I don't have like a good visual metaphor for making a black hole safer, so we just gotta, it'll also get you. Thanks, that's us.
Thank you.